Exodus 20. Exodus 20. Got a little further than I expected last week. Tonight we may not get as far. But last week, if you can recall, we ended with the Israelites arriving at Mount Sinai. And we talked about how they had to be very, very careful not to get too close to the mountain. Because when the Lord's presence arrived, if they were on that mountain, or their livestock was on that mountain, it would be killed. It would be stoned to death. Okay? And we talked about how God came down and presented himself in a cloud and fire and earthquake. And the people were terrified. And again, my mental picture is this big mountain, Mount Sinai, and these posts, orange cones with caution tape all around it. And I know my kids well enough that if we say, don't go past that caution tape, at least one of them, little Ezra, would try to go past that caution tape. So I can't imagine being a parent or a grandparent having kids right there by the mountain, knowing that if they go over, they have to get killed. I'd be so afraid. And then to have God come down in God's presence, like how frightening would that be? But God didn't do it to frighten them. He did it to give them peace and to give them assurance of who he was and what he was doing in their lives. So, again, we pick up in chapter 20 tonight. Remember, as we read these commandments, that the first 4 commandments speak of our relationship between us, or Israel, and God. And the last 6 are relationships between each other. So Exodus 20, and God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. God is, and go ahead to verse 3. You shall have no other gods before me. So God here is not acknowledging other gods, capital G, per se, but anything that we would put above him becomes a god, right? Any lowercase g. Maybe it's our job. Maybe it's a spouse. Maybe it's I don't know what it may be. But any lowercase g, any other god before him, right? And we see that all the time. People put little gods before him all the time. And even in the church, we find a way somehow to excuse that. Well, I love God and he knows it, but this is important, right? And again, I haven't seen that in this church, praise God. But I have been at some churches where, your kid has a ball game, and I understand. I've got kids, they don't play ball, but if they did, there would be that tension. But what are we going to put above God? Right? And so God says, I am the Lord your God. I brought you out of Egypt. I brought you out of slavery. Don't have any other gods before me. And even though we haven't been slaves in Egypt, as we've talked about all through this whole time that we've studied Exodus, we have been slaves, right? And God has brought us out of that slavery. And because of that, we can have no other gods before him. Verse 4, you shall not make for yourself any image in the form of anything in heaven, above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sins of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation, to those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commands. This one is the one that Israel fell victim to over and over and over again. Right? And you notice in verse 5 there's a condition to this commandment. Right? And he says, there's a generational curse for those who hate me. But if you love me, I will love you for generations to come. All right? And so Israel has this. They know this. This was given to them. This is a commandment. Like, I will bless you. And I will curse you, depending on what you do with me. And yet, knowing this curse, again, we put ourselves in this situation and we see Israel, and they keep falling and keep grumbling and keep sinning. And it's so easy to look back and say, man, why did you do that? Right? Why did you allow yourselves to be so stupid, I can't think of another word, to keep falling into sin, especially when you have these words from God? And then I look at myself, like I said last week, and I'm like, I don't have God out here. I've got God in here. And I still find find myself tempted to sin time and time again. Right? So it's easy to look back on the Israelites here and point fingers and say, why did you do that? But then I need to look in the mirror first and say, why do I still do it? Right? I have God in me. Right? And we know that sin becomes so habitual that it is hard to break. And it doesn't matter if you're saved or not. It is still hard. Right? The good thing is when you do have Jesus Christ, when you do have the Holy Spirit living in you, hopefully, the thing is you should get to the point where resisting temptation becomes easier and easier. But it only becomes easier as you continue to resist and resist and resist. Right? Chapter 7, or verse 7, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Don't take the Lord's name in vain, right, in a meaningless way. And God is not God's name, right? God is a title. And we kind of don't always get that, but God is his title. His name is Yahweh, right? And we've talked about that name before and the significance of that. But again, there is a very interesting thing that Jesus says when he teaches us how to pray, right? He says, hallowed be your name. Hallowed means holy. His name is holy. So much so that Jews, and we talked about this several weeks ago, Jews don't even speak his name, right? They have another name for God, Yahweh, that they say because it is too holy to speak. And again, I think sometimes we as Christians become very lackadaisical, very just laid back in our approach to God. And I've told this to my students before, like, we waltz into church and act like, I'm going to church, right? But man, there is a reverence that we should have for him. He is a God that comes down in fire and shakes the earth and sends clouds and we just act like we can just come up to him at any time and just be however we want. And God, we can, because of who Jesus is and what he did on the cross, we can now approach the Father through the Son. But we still have to be very reverent. And I think that we've lost a lot of reverency for God. And I think that that's something that I've had to deal with. And I again tell my students all the time, like, you need to take it serious. Come into church, have fellowship. That's what this is about. This is church. Let's have fellowship as believers. But guys, we've got to be reverent too. Right? There comes a time when we put everything else aside, and it's about us and God. Verse 8, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do no work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God, and on it you shall do no work. Neither you, nor your son or daughter, your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that's in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the seventh day and made it holy. We're told elsewhere that this is a covenant that God made with Israel. Okay? I wrestled with this. I was talking to my students today. Somebody that goes to church here has questioned me on this many, many times, right? Because you read the commandments, and if you look just how much room it takes up, this takes up more room. This is an important one. As we continue on in Exodus and Leviticus, keeping the Sabbath day holy is actually a huge thing, right? You could be stoned to death for not keeping it Sabbath, just like you could be stoned to death for murder, and yet this is one that we kind of brush aside. Do we have to keep the Sabbath, meaning Friday night to Saturday night? No, we don't. Why did we change from that? Well, we wanted to get away from what the Jews were doing, right? We wanted as Protestants, as Christians, followers of Jesus, to kind of get away from that and separate ourselves. But even that, when Jesus comes in the New Testament, what does Jesus do with the commandments? He takes them deeper. He didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law. He came to make it harder for us. What did Jesus say? You've heard it said, don't kill. And I say, don't hate your brother. Right? It takes it a little deeper. It takes it spiritual. It's the heart matter. Jesus said, what? You've heard it said, don't commit adultery. I tell you, don't even look at a woman in lust or a man in lust, right? It goes deeper. It goes to the heart. So in this, Jesus is saying to us, right, I am the Lord of the Sabbath. Sabbath was what was for you guys. But here's the thing. You don't have to go to church on Sunday. And that's scary for a pastor to be telling people, don't come to church on Sunday. That's not what I'm saying, but that's kind of the heart of it. It's not about the physical work anymore, just the same as adultery is not just physical, murder is not just physical. It's about your heart. How are you resting? And not just resting physically, but are you resting in the work that Jesus Christ has done for you? Right? And this is going to be a sermon coming up at some point, because I'd like for everyone to hear that, because we get caught up in this, I think, and because again, I was raised in a household where we went to church, we went to one of my grandparents to eat, and then every afternoon, it didn't matter what the occasion, we had to lay down in the bed, right? We had to rest. And there was no rest for me and my brothers, right? We were sitting there staring at the speckled ceiling, and I had some very theologically deep, as a 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old kid, looking at the speckles in the ceiling and actually being scared about hell and thinking about death. Like, that's where a lot of my thoughts about the end times and death came in, was staring at the ceilings Sunday afternoon. But that's not what Jesus means, right? It's okay to get in your boat and go out and fish. It's okay to go to something else, right? As long as you're resting, finding time to commune with Him, and even more so just realizing we don't have to strive anymore to earn our salvation. The Sabbath that Christ has given us is a rest and a peace that nothing else can give us. All right. A lot of time on that. Move on. Verse 12. Honor your father and mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. This was a big deal. I wish my kids were in here. Right? We find that cursing your mom and dad, and my kids have never cursed me, but it's just everyone's got kids, and everyone knows, right? It was a capital offense, and we're going to continue and read on, and especially in Leviticus when we get there too. But talking back to mom and dad would get more than just a timeout or a smack across the face. It could literally get you killed, right? But the second part of the verse is what we often misquote, right? And I think we mean well, and as parents, I've used it before, but if you read the second part of that verse, we always like to read that first part, honor your father and mother so that you live long, right? And we stop most of the time, right? If you want to live a long life, you're going to honor me, right? What does what does God say? He says, so that you will live long in the land, okay? Again, remember, this is a covenant, it still is for us, but this is a covenant to the Israelites. And so what God is saying is you honor your father and mother, and when you get to Canaan, that will become Israel, you will live there a long, long time. If you're not honoring your father and mother, you won't be living there very long. Okay? And as we've gotten into the prophets, we see that they live there and then are taken away and go back and taken away. And so we see this kind of playing out. But again, we often misquote that until we use it as leverage over our kids. Like, if you want to live long, you will obey me. Well, that's not really the intent that God had with that, but that's okay. Verse 13, you shall not murder. Right, again, taking the life in self-defense as a result of a capital offense at the hands of the government or in defending one's country, that's not murder. That's killing. And there's a big difference. And we're going to read about that later as well. I know that was something that Elijah and I, my oldest, had disagreed about for a long time. He's like, how can you kill somebody if they came into the house? I'm like, well, because I have my wife, your mom, and 4 of you. And it's called self-defense. And nowhere in the Bible does it say I can't defend my family. As a matter of fact, as a man and as a Christian man, I need to be standing up for my family, right? I'm not going at it premeditated, so it's not murder. So again, I get the kids on this all the time down the road because, Mr. Powers, what about? And I'm like, what does it say? It doesn't say you can't kill. It says don't murder. And then we talk about the difference between murder, defense, and killing, and blah, blah, blah. All right. 14, you shall not commit adultery. pretty, again, self-obvious. Marriage should be honored, right? And the marriage bed kept pure. God talks about that throughout the rest of the Old Testament and the New Testament. And again, it's one of those in our day that just kind of, we know it, but it's one of those things in the church that just permeates and it's in there, and so we can't deny it. And I think that people are starting to see, especially with all the other agendas out there, like we've got to keep this sacred. Like there is marriage, and it means something, and then all these other things get in the way. But the awesome thing is, again, God understands every time. I mean, with all of these, we all have fallen short, and God still loves us and still blesses us when we come back to Him, right? Don't steal, okay? This isn't just about stealing, but this is about respecting people's belongings, okay? It's not going up and just stealing, but it's respecting what somebody else has, right? And this is a cultural thing as well, okay? I mean, my wife can tell you in the village that she grew up in, it's not really considered stealing. If you have something that somebody else needs, they do what? They take it, right? To us, we'd be like, arrest them, take them to jail, whatever, right? In her village, it's like, you have it, I need it, we live in a community, I'm taking it, right? So even this law, or this commandment, do not steal, is kind of conditional depending on who you are, right? I mean, it's don't steal, but what does that mean to that culture? And again, this was given to Israel. They knew exactly what God was saying. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor, right? That's just to protect your neighbor's reputation. Verse 17, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, his male or female servant, his ox or his donkey or anything that belongs to him. To covet is not to take, but obviously to want to take, right? We've already dealt with don't steal, but now don't even want to steal, right? Don't want what somebody else has. All right. And again, at this point, we see that we've all fallen short of at least 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 of those, 5, who knows. And we've been separated from God because of this. All right. We can't keep the whole law, no matter how good we try. And again, that's why we needed Jesus to come for us. In the next section, it should actually be popped into chapter 21, but we're going to go ahead and just read all the way through down to 21, and then we'll talk about it. When the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain and smoke, they trembled with fear, and they stayed a distance and said to Moses, "Speak to us yourself, and we will listen, but do not have God speak to us, or we will die." Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid. God has come to test you, so that the fear of God will be with you and keep you from sinning." The fear of the Lord, guys, should keep us from sinning, right? If we fear the Lord, and they were physically afraid, okay? I mean, again, if we experienced what they experienced, we would be trembling and not want God to speak to us. But what Moses says is, don't worry. He is here to test you, to make sure that you don't sin. And again, we need to fear the Lord. Not so much the mean side of it. We need to fear Him. There is a reverence, again, that the children of Israel understood that we kind of miss today because we don't always hear of the hardness of God, the harshness of God. And they stayed at a distance. Where was I? 21. The people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. And then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites this, you have seen for yourselves that I have spoken to you from heaven. Do not make any gods to be alongside me. Do not make for yourselves gods of silver or gold. Make an altar of earth for me and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, your sheep and your goats and your cattle. And wherever I cause my name to be honored, I will come to you and bless you. And I will make an altar of stones for you. If you make an altar of stones for me, do not build it with dressed stones, for you will defile it if you use a tool on it. And do not go up on my altar or on steps, or your private parts will be exposed. And so we see a snapshot of what we're going to, again, when we get to Leviticus later on this year, we see some of these rules that God's going to put in place. And to us, they sound a little crazy. What's the deal with not having a dressed stone? What does he mean by having a non-dressed stone or a non-hewn stone? He wants them to use raw, uncut stones. All right? They're not going to look pretty. It's like us going out here to the creek and picking up big old stones and building an altar to God. You know, in my mind, I'm like, okay, this is for God. I've got to polish this, and I need to, break some of it off, and I need it to look really good because I'm doing this for God. And God says, no, I am holy. God could have had them cut the stones to fit nicely together, but he chose to leave it plain. And this is a picture, again, of what Jesus has done for us on the cross. Remember, the altar was a way to approach God, and God said, go out, get these stones, and just put them up there. I don't want you to add anything to this, because I am going to add everything to it, right? See, we can't add anything to what Jesus already has done for us. Our talents, our abilities, we may be great craftsmen, but God didn't want the craftsmen to build this. He said, you just bring it. I'll do the rest. And that's what Jesus said to us. Like, you may be talented in everything, but guess what? I don't need your talent. I've got this. I've got you covered. I didn't die on the cross, and Jesus is enough. So as we move into the next section, we see a lot of discussion about slavery. And this is referring to a fellow Jew. And there were many reasons somebody would become a slave. Okay? And we've talked about this last week. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. That most people became slaves not because of what we think of today, but they became slaves to pay off work. And it may have been some kind of restitution they had to make if somebody stole something or killed something on accident or whatever. Or they could have been born a slave. But that sets the premise for chapter 21. These are the laws you are to set before them. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he is to serve you for 6 years. But if the 7th year comes, he shall go free without paying anything. All right, so again, we talked about the difference between Jewish slavery, modern day slavery. After 6 years, you get to go free. Didn't matter why they were in slavery. If it was paid off, good. If it wasn't paid off, it doesn't matter. They got to go free. And God is still showing the children mercy, right? God is showing even the slaves, even the servants, that he is merciful to them. And so you have to serve 6 years, but after that, you're free to go. Verse 3, if he comes alone, he is to go free alone. But if he has a wife, when he comes, she is to go with him. If his master gives him a wife and she bears him sons or daughters, the woman and her children shall belong to her master, and only the man shall go free. Now, that's a little sad. Hopefully you have a good master that will release the wife and the kids, but they're under no obligation to do so. But if the servant declares, I love my master and my wife and children and do not want to go free, then his master must take him to the judges. He shall take him to the door and the doorpost and pierce his ear with an awl, and then he will be a servant for life. And this is what we talked about, the bond servant. Okay, and I didn't demonstrate it, but I talked about that this Sunday. You would take like an ice pick and put it through your ear in front of all the judges, and you were now their servant for life. Verse 7, if a man sells his daughter as a servant, she is not to go free as male servants. That sounds a little harsh, doesn't it? But remember, this was a way of paying off your debt. If you had one, you could sell your daughter. And the reason the female was not to leave was that it would have been assumed that the male would have taken her as his wife. And we're going to see that as we continue on. Verse 8, if she does not please the master who has selected her for himself, he must let her be redeemed. He has no right to sell her to foreigners because he has broken faith with her. If he selects her for his son, he must grant her the right of a daughter. If he marries another woman, he must not deprive the first one of her food, clothing, and marital rights. If he does not provide her with these three things, she is to go free without any payment of money. And again, this was to protect women. Okay, and again, we just talked about how it sounds harsh to have the daughters sold into slavery or servanthood, but God still protects the women. And this was something, and again, in this day, with the cultures around Israel, that was kind of unheard of, right? Women had no social role whatsoever in most societies and most cultures around Israel. And so God is, again, separating his people from all other peoples. He's making them holy like he is holy. And he says, you can't treat her like a slave, but as a wife. And then the man has to take care of her, and if he doesn't, then eventually she can just go free. Verse 12, we get into personal injuries. Anyone who strikes a person with a fatal blow is to be put to death. God says if you struck someone hard enough to kill them, you did it to kill them. Okay? So again, this would be equated to murder. Most of the time, most of us understand our own strength. We know what will kill somebody and what will hurt somebody. And so God says, if you hurt them, if you hit them with a fatal blow, you're going to die because you obviously intended to kill them. However, if it is not done intentionally, and so here God is switching it, but God lets it happen, they are to flee to a place I will designate. And this is a biblical way of saying if someone didn't plan to hurt someone, somebody walks up to you and scares you and you turn around and punch them, or you get into a fist fight, it wasn't something that you had planned on doing, God's going to provide a way of escape, right? And when they come into the promised land, God is going to give them cities of refuge, which I preached about here about a year ago, the cities of refuge and what they stood for and what they were. But in essence, he's telling them that when you get to Israel, and they haven't established these places yet because they're still wandering in the desert, but when you get to Israel, when you get to Canaan, you're going to set these places up, and these are going to be places that when you kill somebody by accident, you can flee to. You flee from the family of the dead person, and they cannot find you and kill you. All right? So God is providing a refuge for them. Verse 14, but if anyone schemes and kills someone deliberately, that person is to be taken away from my altar and put to death. All right, so if you kill somebody and you think you're just going to run to this city and cling to the altar and act like that's going to save you, God says no. And again, we talked about this when we talked about the city of refuge. It actually had to go to trial, and if the judges said, no, you meant to kill them, then they could release you. And so it doesn't matter if you're hanging on to the altar of God. You made it to the city of refuge. If you did it on purpose, you are going to be killed. Okay? So anything premeditated, any scheme that you have to hurt somebody and it leads to death, you will be held responsible. Anyone who attacks their father or mother is to be put to death. Right? Adult children who try to hurt their parents, death. 16. Anyone who kidnaps someone is to be put to death, whether the victim has been sold or is still in the kidnapper's possession. Right? This is a big deal. No stealing kids. Sometimes maybe this is harsh, sometimes I still wish we lived by Old Testament rules. Right? You kidnap somebody, you die. The trauma that you've imposed on somebody, especially a little kid, you deserve bad things to happen to you. And that's what God says. Even if they're still alive, they're going to die. Verse 8, where am I at? Verse 17, anyone who curses their father or mother should be put to death. Again, we mentioned that before. Curse your parents, you die. 18, if people quarrel and one person hits another with a stone or with his fist, and the victim does not die but is confined to bed, the one who struck the blow will not be held liable if the other can get up and walk around outside with the staff. However, the guilty party must pay the injured person for any loss of time and see that the victim is completely healed. All right, so if you hurt somebody, you're going to pay for all their hospital bills and anything else, any other financial things that they incur. Verse 20, anyone who beats their male or female slave with a rod must be punished if the slave dies as a direct result. But they are not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two, since the slave is their property. Again, there are some slave owners in the South and America that use this verse to justify what they did, right? And it's in the Bible. They pulled it out of context, but yeah, you could beat your slave. And if they died, you just had to punish. You didn't have to die, but you were punished. Doesn't really even tell what the punishment is in this section right now. But if they get better, then, well, good. Nothing happens to you. Verse 22, if people are fighting and hit a pregnant woman, and she gives birth prematurely, but there is no serious injury, the offender must be fined whatever the woman's husband demands and the court allows. But if there is a serious injury, and you are to take a life for a life, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. And here's where we get that eye for eye and tooth for tooth saying. If there's any harm to the baby, you shall pay life for life. If that baby dies, you die. Right? And God was saying to the Israelites, that baby's life is no less important than that of an adult. I wish America could get that this morning, this night, this evening. Right? That babies' lives matter. Unborn lives matter. This shows us right here. If nothing else throughout Scripture, there's plenty to back up pro-life choices. But this right here speaks for itself. Right? Verse 26, an owner who hits a male or female slave in the eye and destroys it must let the slave go free to compensate for the eye. And an owner who knocks out the tooth of a male or female slave must let the slave go free to compensate for the tooth. So I guess you jump back up a couple of verses, you can beat your slave, but just don't knock their eye out or knock their tooth out. Because if you do, then they have to go free. Right? You want to hurt them bad enough that they've learned their lesson, I guess, but don't knock out their tooth, don't poke out their eye, or they have to get to go free. All right. If a bull gores a man or a woman to death, the bull is to be stoned to death, and its meat is not to be eaten. But the owner of the bull will not be held responsible. If, however, the bull has had the habit of goring, and the owner has been warned but has not kept it pinned up, and it kills a man or a woman, the bull is to be stoned, and the owner is to be put to death. So if a bull or an animal attacks a person and it has no history of doing it, just kill the animal. If the animal has a history of doing it, harming people, you kill the human as well. I think of some dogs that we had living close to us in northern Kentucky. They were aggressive towards people. They bit people. And the owners got to keep the stinking dogs. And it made me so mad. I called whoever I could call, and I was not very Christ-like at the time. I called the pound, animal control, and I said, are you not going to euthanize the dog? It literally bit somebody. No, they have to keep it pinned up in quarantine for so many days. I said, that's fine. I said, if it comes out, I'm shooting it. Well, you can't do that. You'll get charged. If it comes out and comes on my yard, I'm shooting it. Again, as arcane and old-fashioned as some of these rules are, it's common sense stuff, guys, right? God gave them to us common sense. I mean, minus the slavery stuff, everything that I've read so far makes sense to me, right? And if you're a logical human being and not caught up in the liberal mindset, I think that most of this makes sense to you, I hope. All right, verses 31 through 36. I'm going to read on down to get to chapter 22. This law also applies if a bull gores a son or daughter. If the bull gores a male or female slave, the owner must pay 30 shekels of silver to the master and the slave, and the bull is to be stoned to death. If anyone uncovers a pit or digs one and fails to cover it, and the ox or a donkey fall into it, the one who opened the pit must pay the owner for the loss and take the dead animal in exchange. If anyone's bull injures someone else's bull and it dies, the two parties are to sell the live one and divide both the money and the dead animal equally. However, if it was known that the bull had a habit of goring, yet the owner kept it pinned up, the owner must pay animal for animal and take the dead animal in exchange. Okay? Very interesting stuff there. Even the animals had laws about them. God understood that there would be all kinds of issues, and so He made these laws early on to just make sure that things were taken care of. All right, let's jump into verse 20 or chapter 22 real quick, because it's more laws. Whoever steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it must pay back 5 head of cattle for the ox and 4 sheep for the sheep. This is restitution. And again, this would be nice to have in our day and age. Again, sometimes you get restitution, but it takes years of court, and sometimes you don't get anything. But think about it. If someone destroys somebody else's property, if somebody steals from you, it'd be nice for them to have to actually fix it or pay for it, right? I'm all for people going to prison when they deserve it, but I also think that before they go to prison or while they're in prison, they should have to go back and make amends for what they did. I'm sorry, but sometimes prison is just a free ride. We had a guy, a veteran that lived, and I felt sorry for him because he was a veteran. He served our country. He deserved it much more than what he got, but there were times of the year when he was homeless. He would go and petty theft. He would steal something so that he could, from a convenience store, so he could spend a few nights in prison because he needed a warm bed and a hot meal. And he said, that's what prison was for me. It wasn't punishment. It was actually a good thing. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's kind of the problem. And again, in his case, we felt him, but oftentimes I feel like we just kind of throw people in prison and they get everything paid for, and yet the people that they've hurt are on the outside still needing help, right? But God, again, God says it, like, you pay back, get our court systems to agree with that, maybe. If a thief is caught breaking in at night and is struck a fatal blow, the defender is not guilty of bloodshed. But if it happens after sunrise, the defender is guilty of bloodshed. Okay? And this is specifically about somebody that breaks in to steal food. Okay? It doesn't necessarily say it in here, but within, people much smarter than me have actually kind of studied on this. And it continues on, so let me continue on because it gives more for it. Anyone who steals must certainly make restitution, but if they have nothing, they must be sold to pay for the theft. So what we're talking about here is when somebody steals because they're hungry. Okay, this isn't just breaking in with the intent to kill, rape, steal, whatever, but this is if they break in because they're hungry. Okay, and again, in that situation I just mentioned with the veteran, like he was hungry. He was very hungry many nights, and he stole, didn't make it right, but he was stealing for a quote-unquote good cause, right? So if somebody breaks into your house in this time because they're hungry, and at night you don't know, you're scared, you kill them, well, you're free, but if it's morning time and the sun is out and you kill them, you're guilty of that bloodshed. If the person didn't intend to cause any harm, then that's what he's talking about here. Okay? Verse 4, if the stolen animal is found alive in their possession, whether ox or donkey or sheep, they must pay back double. Which is funny because they don't have anything to begin with, but then they still have to pay back double. So again, that's how people found themselves becoming servants, because they didn't have anything. They had to make money to pay for that. If anyone grazes their livestock in a field or vineyard and lets them stray and they graze in someone else's field, the offender must make restitution from the best of their own vineyard or field. If a fire breaks out and spreads into thorn bushes so that it burns shocks of grain or standing grain or the whole field, the one who started the fire must make restitution. If anyone gives a neighbor silver or goods for safekeeping and they are stolen from the neighbor's house, the thief, if caught, must pay back double. If the thief is not caught, the owner of the house must appear before the judges, and they must determine whether the owner of the house has laid hands on the other person's property. In all cases of illegal possession of an ox, donkey, sheep, garment, or any other lost property about which somebody says, "This is mine," both parties are to bring the case before the judges. The one whom the judge declares guilty must pay back double to the other. All right, again, good idea of how God tells us to judge, how God told the Israelites to judge on his behalf. In verse 10, if anyone gives a donkey or an ox or a sheep or another animal to a neighbor for safekeeping and it dies, or is injured, is taken away while no one is looking, the issue between them will be settled by the taking of an oath before the Lord that the neighbor did not lay hands on the other person's property. The owner is to accept this, and no restitution is required. But if the animal was stolen from the neighbor, restitution must be made to the owner. If it was torn to pieces by a wild animal, the neighbor shall bring in the remains as evidence, and shall not be required to pay for the torn animal. If anyone borrows an animal from their neighbor, and it is injured or dies while the owner is not present, they must make restitution. But if the owner is with the animal, the borrower will not have to pay. If the animal was hired, the money paid for the hire covers the loss. Okay, so Again, interesting things, not so much for us today, but again, would have been a big deal for them in their day. All right, let's wrap up. We're going to get into some social responsibilities of the people. He's going to speak of some sexual sins, some sins of witchcraft that were going on in Israel. And again, many cultures around Israel were practicing some of the things that he's talking about, and that's why God's putting these rules in place to keep them from them, again, with the goal of making them holy as he is holy. So I'm going to real quickly just knock these out. If a man seduces a virgin who is not pledged to be married and sleeps with her, he must pay the bride price, and she shall be his wife. So if a man lies with a woman, they weren't married, he has to take her as his wife, right? He thought she was attractive enough to sleep with her. Guess what, buddy? You're going to take her on as your wife now. If her father absolutely refuses to give her to him, he must still pay the bride price for virgins. So it's going to cost this guy either way. If the father says, no, you are not marrying her, then she doesn't have to be his wife, and he still has to pay. Do not allow sorcerers to live. Witchcraft and sorcery are the same thing. God takes it very, very seriously, as we're going to continue to see, and you are to stone that person to death. Okay? Anyone who has sexual relations with an animal is to be put to death. That makes sense. Anyone who sacrifices to any other god, then the Lord must be destroyed. Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner, for you were foreigners in Egypt. Do not take advantage of the widow or the fatherless. If you do, and they cry out to me, I will certainly hear their cry. My anger will be aroused, and I will kill you with the sword. Your wives will become widows, and your children will become fatherless. If you lend money to one of the people among you who is in need, do not treat it like a business deal. Charge no interest. All right, so you couldn't charge interest. Couldn't take advantage of people. God would come down and he would kill you. All right. If you take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, return it by sunset, because the cloak is the only covering your neighbor has. What else can they sleep in? When they cry out to me, I will hear them, for I am compassionate. Do not blaspheme God or curse the ruler of your people. Do not hold back offerings from your granaries or your vats. You must give me the firstborn of your sons. All right? And again, as I read through these, it's easy just to get caught up in rule after rule after rule, but this is what Jesus came to save us from. No longer, we still have to keep these rules, right? But no longer are we bound to death if we disobey some of these. And he says here at the very end, you are to give me your firstborn. This was a reminder to the people of what God had done for them in Egypt. He spared the firstborn sons, and therefore they were to be given unto the Lord. And we'll wrap it up. Do the same with your cattle and your sheep. Let them stay with their mothers for 7 days, but give them to me on the 8th day. You are to be my holy people. So do not eat the meat of an animal torn by wild beasts. Throw it to the dogs. What an interesting way to end it. I would have ended it with, you are my holy people. You are my holy people. But then God throws in there, so, by the way, don't eat meat that an animal's torn apart. Just give it to the dogs. And the reason for that is that they were not to eat meat with blood in it. And we're going to learn about that later on as well. But God is actually using all of these rules that kind of seem to don't really make a lot of sense. He's starting them off with these small rules because it's actually preparing them for a time when all of it does matter. Okay? So, let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you, God, that you are loving, you are compassionate. Lord, you are just and you are holy. And we're reminded of that as we read through some of these rules that just don't maybe make a lot of sense to us or don't seem to fit for us today. But it reminds me, at least, that you are holy. You are set apart. And you have a standard that you have called us to live to. And Lord, none of us can live to that as we've read through the Ten Commandments. None of us can achieve that on our own. And thank you that you sent your Son, your only Son, your firstborn Son, Jesus, to come into this world, to live a perfect sinless life, to die on the cross, and to rise again, to give us freedom. Lord, I pray that we would go here safely tonight, Father, that your angels would surround us, Lord. Lord, again, be with those that aren't feeling well tonight, Father. Continue to touch and heal those in our body that need healing now. Lord, I pray you bring us back here safely on Sunday. In Jesus' name.